Hello there, kia ora. It's been yet another very odd week with all sorts of things going on that's really hard to get your head around sometimes. It started with Jack Tame on Q&A asking why the Prime Minister hasn't come on to see him and chat about all things Prime Ministerial. I don't think the Prime Minister realises that the longer he leaves that, the more that there is for Jack to dig into, which means that the interview is going to be even harsher on him. But the Prime Minister not realising things isn't exactly new at the moment. There was their whole let's get tough on crime thing, which is actually really soft on crime and tough on criminals. There was the revelation of the part-time health commissioner. There was a whole bunch of issues around conspiracy theorists and sovereign citizens, which have been making headlines. There's so much stuff. I didn't even get a chance to talk about the Prime Minister losing his rag over freaking Target, as he put it. It was just a really strange week. But as we come up to the 1-year anniversary of this government having won the election, maybe we should start taking stock in exactly what it is that they've managed to achieve versus what it is that they say that they've achieved. Because I'm pretty sure that the two aren't exactly the same. Those lists aren't going to have much overlap at the moment, but we'll see. Anyway, enjoy today's Omnibus edition. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, tell everybody about it, or don't. This is just a video, it's not the police. Enjoy. Hello there, kia ora. Where is the Prime Minister? It's a question that's been asked this weekend by Q&A's Jack Tame, responding to many viewer requests to get Christopher Luxon back on the show. He hasn't been on in over a year and never once as Prime Minister. And for context, John Key and Bill English appeared about 4 times a year on the show. Dame Jacinda twice a year. And when she decided to stop doing that media time with Mike Hosking, well, the right lost their rag, but now seem very quiet over Luxon not being on this show. The fact is, this Prime Minister is very selective about how much time he gives to media. He's one of the least accessible to media of any Prime Ministers we've seen in decades. We've seen him cut the time he spends in post-cabinet press conferences, refuse to do stand-ups and crossing the bridge to and from the House. He does a weekly round of Tuesday morning press stand-ups with regular Vox Pop shows, where they don't have time to often do deep dives into issues. And this government has so many issues, it's not always possible to cover anything anyway. But he has time to make cringe-inducing TikToks.
Voted PM, W.
Ugh. And part of the reason seems to be that he's actually really bad at dealing with media that isn't being sycophantic, like he gets on News Talk ZB when chit-chatting with Mike Hosking. After almost any long-form interview, he's had to walk back comments, whether that's talking about bottom feeders or calling us wet, whiny and inward-looking. But he also has a habit of talking down to people when refusing to answer questions or just walking away from them altogether. He's been caught on hot mics before criticising media for doing their job and seemingly finds it a distraction. Now, it could just be my perspective. I wonder if there's any examples out there.
Can you please answer the question? Do you accept that will mean less money in the hands of those disabled people who are receiving a benefit under your government? Do you accept that that will be the reality?
They're going to have more money each and every year under a national government because we're going to increase benefits each year. It's a different approach from how Labor's looking at it, but what we think is that's the best long-term way to index benefits to inflation.
Is there a reason you don't want to answer the question?
Well, it's a different basis. So yes, in the fiscal plans, we have a different track around what that costs us relative to Labor.
Okay, let's not talk about your fiscal tracks, because let's talk about somebody who is disabled, who is receiving a benefit. Will they get more money under Christopher Luxon, or will they get more money under Christopher Hipkins?
They will have their benefit protected. They will have a regular increase each and every year that will be linked to inflation.
Okay.
How is that going to be a coalition? How is that not going to be a coalition? I just say to you, New Zealand First hasn't gone with us for 27 years, and we all remember 2017. But how is that not going to be a coalition?
So the answer is, get back to the core thing, and actually if you want change, you have to vote for change.
That's not the question. MMP is a system that New Zealanders have voted for now 2 or 3 times.
That's not the
that
question.
is the system.
That's not the question.
And then I have
Can
to
you
form a
state-
coalition
can
government
you
on the other
state
side of that.
whether you are going
And
to
as I
make
said,
that
my
commitment?
preference is to
Yes.
work with National and ACT,
Yes.
and I think that we can do that in a very constructive way.
But this is something that
forward.
your voters, this is something that your supporters say they want you to do. I was at your public meetings, they said that they want you to rule out Winston. So regardless of whatever the decision is, they want
And all I can say to you is
So can
my
you just
position hasn't
say-
changed from
can
yesterday.
you just say
Winston
whether
isn't.
that is going to come before or after the election?
What I can say to you is I am not thinking about New Zealand First. I'm not thinking because they haven't been in Parliament.
So it's
They're
gonna
not
come
a consideration.
Does that
Yeah.
mean that it's going
And
to
at the end of the
come
day, I have to make a government work on the other side of an election. Privilege of buying a house in New Zealand.
But this is just your marketing brochure.
No, it's not. It's actually just explaining. No, I resent that because I think you've got to be really clear. We have actually gone through and laid up our approach and been very open about how we're going to fund it.
No, Christopher, you
That
haven't
has
been
not been
open.
the case on
You
the other
haven't been
side.
open
That
and
has not been the
transparent
case.
about this. I want to just circle back to this international example again, because I come back to Toronto. As I said, a city 20% larger, you live there, you would know, than New Zealand in population. It has a 15% tax on foreign buyers on all properties, and it only raised $250 million last year. That is well short of what you are anticipating.
And I can look at examples in Vancouver, I can look at examples in Australia and other places, and that's why I'm saying
But will you release those numbers, what your evidence is?
Well, we're very comfortable with our numbers. I don't know how to explain it to you anymore.
Well, they don't add up.
Can you point me to any economists other than Castilla who did your numbers who say that your tax plan adds up? Because I can't find any, and I can give you a nice long list of people who say that it doesn't.
We've had a Labor Party try to say that, we had challenges around FTAs, we've had challenges around tax treaties, we've had challenges about taking the ban away, and all of those points have been disproven. We've released 32
By
pages
who?
around our documents. We've released our reviewers' remarks, and we've also released legal advice.
Michael Riddell doesn't think they add up. He's
appreciate-
a fiscal conservative. Shamabil Jacob doesn't think they add up. Eric Crampton from the New Zealand Initiative, right-wing think tank, he doesn't think they add up. Tell me someone who does.
New Zealand economy, and that's exciting. All right, question. Thank you, Amelia. We've asked enough. Thank you. Sorry.
That leaves a $527 million hole.
Calm down. Just let me step you through it. There's 4,000 houses sold to foreigners before the ban, right? Where our plan assumes less than around 1,600 houses need to be sold.
Actually, Nationals based their numbers on 1,700 house sales per year. The Economist's best case scenario picked it would really be more like 708.
Our view is that their modelling is flawed.
These are really simple questions, and this is your central policy. This is the policy that speaks to your economic credibility. As per your policy, you have to sell $20 billion worth of property over 4 years, right?
And Jack, I am really comfortable with our policy. As you've had Nicola on last week, and we've talked about it. We've released all our information in our modelling.
You've released it all?
We've released these.
Have you released your modelling?
Released 32 pages of actually our cost assumptions.
I'm sorry. Have you
released
no.
advice?
Will you commit?
We've released lawyer advice.
Will you commit to releasing your specific modelling that shows how you will sell $20 billion worth of property to foreigners?
We have released a 30-page document with all.
You haven't released that modelling.
We have released our reviewers.
You haven't released that modelling.
Through all our assumptions. I'm very comfortable with that, and we've released even legal advice.
So, in the interest of credibility, does the public not deserve to see that modelling?
And Jack, what I'd also say to you is, since we've made those announcements, there's been a number of experts and advisors that have come out into the public domain and said, "Look, this is great."
If you are so confident with your numbers, will you commit to releasing that specific modelling?
I am extremely confident with our numbers. We have worked
great.
for months.
So will you
We've
commit?
Got great reviewers, great advisors.
Will you commit to releasing that specific modelling? That is the question. It's a very simple question. Will you commit to releasing the specific modelling that shows how you will sell $20 billion worth of property to foreigners over the next 4 years? Are you going to lower your rents, the properties that you rent out?
It's not about me, Jack.
No, but you've said that your settings are going to lead to lower rents.
You talk about my properties every time.
No, it's a simple question. Yeah, I know. Well,
it's pretty simple.
Reasonable, isn't it? I mean, you've got multiple investment properties. So will you be lowering your rents?
What I'll be saying to you is that we are going to put downward pressure on rents by actually unwinding the Bright Line test from 10 to 2 years and unwinding interest deductibility and changing some of the tenancy laws.
Okay, so will you be lowering your rents?
That is advice that the government put in place to this government. Treasury put into.
So again, you're not answering my question. So you say there's going to be downward pressure on rents. So will you be lowering your rents?
It's not about me, Jack. I don't know. I haven't thought that through, and I'm not thinking that through.
But if there's downward, I mean, why would you not think it through? I mean, you've obviously thought through everything that leads to downward pressure.
No, just let's zoom out a little bit.
Look, I commend Jack Tame and the Q&A team for calling out that they have tried and been knocked back to get this interview. And while I hope they get a positive response soon, I can see why the Prime Minister and his office would do so with trepidation. Jack is known for his diligent research and coming with the receipts. He has caught out MPs from across the political spectrum many times in lies, being uninformed, unprepared, and pushing alternative facts that would cause harm. Unlike when you're Deputy Prime Minister or going to be Deputy Prime Minister, where you could probably get away with going on media that doesn't do their research, when you're the Prime Minister, you should expect media to have done theirs. Politicians and the public know what Jack Tame and his team do. And if they're across their job, well, they can handle questions from Jack and his team and get across their perspectives. But by refusing to speak to certain media known to ask tough, detailed questions, it looks like you're incapable of public functions expected of the office, that you know that your perspectives are hard to defend. But I guess that's what happens when you try and build policy around bumper stickers and trending TikTok videos. I mean, in the words of the Prime Minister, it's not very mindful, and it doesn't
slay.
There, kia ora. What does the phrase tough on crime actually mean? Because I am convinced that whatever this government's definition of that is, it's more wrong than Henry Morton's prediction that the light bulb would be an immense failure. But if he predicted that the government's tough on crime stance would be a failure, he'd be right on the money. And therefore actually a really bad example of people getting things terribly wrong. Anyway, this government was in part elected on the refried beans of tough on crime rhetoric that panders to their base by scaring them and blaming all the world's woes on something big and nebulous without actually doing the mahi that would be tough on crime itself, by dealing with the drivers of crime. In the lead up to the election, our media was filled with horror stories, particularly around ram raids, that made people feel unsafe, which is a narrative that this government directly pushed to get elected, despite evidence that violent crimes are either static or dropping. Unfortunately, it worked. Certain groups within the voter base kept running with the sky is falling, Labour soft on crime lines. But in many ways, being tough on crime is the soft way to handle crime. It's easier to take punitive action than it is to deal with the cause and drivers of crime. And this government has made a big deal about how much they focus on punitive measures over crime drivers and how they'll target specifically narrative-driven ideas behind crime, like gangs bad, but 1940s German army insignia, absolutely fine. And the stats released this week show that the impact of that is an increase in violent crime rates. Now, while the National Party say that they would never cherry-pick data for their own purposes, they stood in downtown Auckland and celebrated a decrease in incidents in the area due to increased visibility of the police. Increased police presence, which came at the cost of other areas around Auckland losing beat cops. And the data released showed that while one area of the city might have had a dip, nationally crime rates were skyrocketing, almost like threats of more jail time aren't the disincentive the government claims them to be. Because they're not. According to mountains of research from all over the world, including done here in Aotearoa, well, the policies of this government seem to be the actual drivers of crime. Work done by Auckland University last year, for example, showed that within a New Zealand context, drivers for criminal behaviour include substance addiction, family dysfunction, antisocial associates, a history of offending, poverty, housing insecurity, truancy, and the lasting impacts of colonialism. This government has slashed funding to NGO service providers, including many who work in substance and addiction areas and family dysfunction areas. Laws like the gang patch ban tends to solidify antisocial groups who find other ways to build group cohesion in public. By removing the funding for cultural reports, the government stopped looking at the drivers of offending for many people already in the system, so couldn't offer them the help needed to identify and change behaviours. By re-indexing benefits and causing mass layoffs across sectors and giving the lowest minimum wage increase ever seen, this government has started pushing a lower wage economy as prices continue to rise for essentials like food, power, transport and education, forcing people into poverty or keeping them there. By gutting kāinga ora, builds and funding to social housing builds and forcing people out of emergency accommodation and not tracking where a third of them have gone and poisoning the construction centre and hobbling first home buyers with the loss of the first home grant while financially benefiting investment landlords with tax cuts and bright line test changes, and giving them the powers of things like no-cause terminations, it creates that housing insecurity. And truancy is often caused, according to the experts, by the same drivers that lead to criminal behaviour. The drivers the government are ignoring or making worse by setting targets that have to be met and not dealing with those causes. The government is not actually tackling truancy directly. And when it comes to colonisation, the most obvious outcome are the inequities in being able to access services and resources to ensure equitable outcomes over generations, which has led to systemic distrust and behaviours that continue a cycle of inequitable access and outcomes. By actively removing the policies that were designed to deal directly with those inequitable access points and just declaring that everything's fine, it ensures those inequitable outcomes caused by colonialism will continue to happen. Because when you do nothing and nothing changes, well, you shouldn't be surprised when that's the outcome. And all of this is before you look at how people under 24 who get locked up are exposed to more serious offending while reinforcing their anti-authority worldview, which makes them more susceptible for gang recruitment. That statistics show us the longer someone's incarcerated, the harder it is for them to reintegrate into society without proper support and are more likely to reoffend. And that the longer they spend in prison, the more likely they are to create connections that outside prison would decrease how safe the areas they end up in become. Or how, especially in young people, labels like youth offender shape their self-perspective while already feeling marginalised by society. And because people tend to cling to self-identity, this can become a self-fulfilling prophecy without strong support structures in place. So responses like military boot camps only make these issues worse. No one wants crime, and no one enjoys being the victim of crime. And those who commit crime do need to face the consequences of their actions. But that's the easy part when it comes to crime responses. To be really tough on crime, a government needs to look at the nuance, consider ways to tackle the factors that lead to crime, and give those areas the resources to do the mahi. And it won't mean an immediate plummeting of the crime rates, and it's not a short-term quick fix. But by the government's own numbers, their blunt instrument approach clearly is doing the opposite of bringing down crime rates. If you want to actually be tough on crime, then do the tough things and focus on fixing the things that lead to an increase in crime. Hello there, kia ora. Hello there, kia ora. What does $320,000 get you? Well, it would buy you 2,300 stethoscopes or 296,296 bandages. It could hire almost 2 of the most expensive nurse practitioners out there for a year on full-time salaries, or 4 newly graduated nurses. You could pay for a full-time GP and 70% of a full-time GP. You could buy 52 wheelchairs for MRIs, or 64,000 loaves of bread for new mums to have toast after giving birth. You could get 1.5 full-time qualified surgeons for that. Or you could have one commissioner working 3 days a week telling everyone else in the vast complicated health system we have that they need to tighten their belts to the tune of $1.4 billion so landlords can get their tax cuts. That patients in parts of the country will have to learn to live, literally, without doctors overnight or on weekends. That's right, Dr. Lester Levy, the Te Whatu Ora Commissioner, brought in to gut our healthcare sector. Well, a sector where our medical professionals are screaming out for help and frustration. They're being overstressed, overworked, under-resourced, and gaslit by being told everything is actually fine and they just need to toughen up a little bit. Well, he's only working part-time, just 3 days a week, which is frankly ridiculous. He could be much more efficiently ruthless and destroy the health system far faster if we put in the full effort that we as victims of his cuts expect from our civil servants. A commissioner who was put in from a quote-unquote fiscally responsible government who keep trying to tell us that the health sector is well funded, it just needs discipline, especially in the back room where they're apparently making all the cuts. Now, in his defence, Levy did claim yesterday after a select committee hearing that he's working between 10 and 12 hours a day to fix the problems he claims are in place at Te Whatu Ora on top of a role he has at AUT, which does sound like juggling 2 jobs is simply too much for him. After all, he didn't even show up to that select committee hearing with the detailed financial reports he was told to bring, because apparently that's not his main focus, which may explain why Te Whatu Ora is usually run by a board who can spread the load and better coordinate the vast, complicated machinery of our health system. But after this government came to power and demanded cuts, again to pay for tax cuts for the landlords and the wealthy, they lost a lot of them who felt it was impossible to both run a healthcare system like ours, which meets the needs of the country, and make cuts on a budget that was increased lower than the rate of inflation. So every time you hear a story about pressures on our hospitals, staff shortages across the sector, or the tragic outcomes of believing you can strip the healthcare system to its bones and expect it to be fine, remember that the person in charge of it all, the person put in by this government, is paid enough to hire 4 new nurses to work full time, which means patients probably are not their highest priority. So there, kia ora. Do you recall 2 years ago when we were in the throes of the local body elections, and it turned out that there were candidates that were hiding their affiliations to disinformation networks? At the time, there was media, both mainstream and alternative, that were keeping an eye on and reporting on candidates who had links to these types of groups. And in the end, about 24 were elected all over the country. Now, some of them, to their credit, have actually put their head down and done the mahi in front of them. Others, not so much. They've been working against their council and their constituents to push their own agendas. But while we saw pushback in the media in 2022, we're now seeing media not reporting on those disinformation group connections when those elected officials cause problems. Now, some media do this on purpose. The ODT, for example, has a writer who has long platformed and tried to normalize the actions of members from Voices for Freedom, after all. But for other media, the connections are no longer being reported on, and it's a problem. Readers build their views based on the information given to them. When they come back to research during the election, if that information's not there, well, they can't base a judgment on something that they don't have in front of them. And sometimes voters can have really short memories. So when you see a story about, say, Southland District Council having a lone dissenter in their ranks against the tyranny of rate rises to cover the rising costs of everything and the reincorporated infrastructure costs this government put back on councils, she sounds kind of reasonable. But you give the context that she's a climate change denying contributor to Reality Check Radio who's been on anti-immigrant tirades calling for immigrants to be raided before even considering coming to the country, well, it changes the way her actions are perceived. The Oreti local board made headlines recently after a coup saw a small group of members overthrow the chair of the board over their disagreements on his priorities. This board made headlines after these same members chose to ignore requests from the public and police for upgraded security cameras in Winton, claiming they're just asking more questions. 2 of these board members had links to Voices for Freedom. One was a guest speaker against Māori involvement in anti-Three Water tours. The other wrote racist tirades about Māori elites and called on council to, in her words, ignore the experts on climate and just use our common sense. She also lied about her dogs being dead to avoid paying for animal registration fees. But the reporting just mentions the overthrowing of the board chair. Those connections and actions show a change in the story because it shows a change in the personalities that are being presented. And in Hamilton this week, we saw Sovereign Citizen and NZ Loyal member Andrew Bidder hit headlines as part of the process instigated by Code of Conduct complaints over his use of slurs which are used to denigrate disabled people. The 2 RNZ stories on the events frame the story as Bidder versus Council in a pretty balanced way on the surface. The Waikato Times followed up and pointed out he had refused to offer an apology to disability advocacy groups and threatened a citizen's arrest on Hamilton's deputy mayor. But none of them mention his links to sovereign citizen organisation, the Residents and Ratepayers Association, the association that's run by a convicted fraudster and funded by groups with links to some powerful political allies. The same association where Bidder and Hamilton East MP Ryan Hamilton were in the audience when they issued execution writs for councillors last year. He even mentioned in his defence this week how his actions were caused by the anger he has towards the blatant 20-minute city plan, which is a conspiracy he believes in. But that was omitted by the media. These details changed the context of the story from councillor says he was wronged to councillor being held accountable for his own actions and putting people in harm's way. Well, accountable to the fullest extent of a very weak law. And next year, when the local elections roll around again, you can bet that there will be more people, some of these ones, some new ones, running for this under the same banners. But the focus is going to be on issues like the Māori ward referenda, meaning mainstream media with its limited resources are probably not going to be able to focus on this as much as they did in the past. And of course, everyone is entitled to vote for who they want, but surely they should be given all the information possible to make informed decisions. Actually, do you know who would be really great to talk to about this? Some of the people on the receiving end of the actions of these people, which is what I will be doing tonight on YouTube and Facebook. I've got Hamilton City Deputy Mayor Angela O'Leary, the woman who had the citizen's arrest comment thrown at her, who was one of the people issued an execution writ by Andrew Bidder. She'll be joining me along with Wellington Mayor Tori Whānau so that we can have a talk about some of the abuse and the risks to safety that are out there for our elected officials being caused by disinformation. So you can find links to that in my bio, YouTube and Facebook from 8 p.m. on Friday the 20th of September. Depending on when you're watching this, you might want to go back and rewatch it. But when it comes to our election process next year, there's already a lot on the table and it's already hard to get people engaged. Making sure that we know who it is that we're voting for and what candidates actually stand for mean that we have less of a chance of a coup being held on a community board over somebody who lied about their dead dogs to avoid registration fees. Right, last week it was revealed that Transport Minister Simeon Brown, seen here wondering why you're not flooring it outside the local primary school, had chosen to ignore official advice on the timeframe around reducing rules for emissions on tailpipe exhaust in an effort to rush through changes at the behest of the automobile lobby groups. Our emission criteria already lagged behind our major trading partners and were in a rapid rate of improvement to meet those international standards. But this decision now puts us in a race with Russia to be the lowest of those in the emission scales. Being in a race with Russia to be the worst at something doesn't actually sound like great economic sense to me. On Monday, News Talk ZB reported that a new piece of public artwork known as the Silver Tier, which is to be installed on Wellington's waterfront, would cost a whopping $5.5 million. Only it would actually cost about $600,000 and it was 5.5 meters tall. The money's been raised by a charitable trust. News Talk ZB's owners, NZME said, you expect us to fact check the station that let Mike Hosking conflate COVID death numbers downplaying COVID-19, or let Kate Hawkesby make false claims that brown people were jumping hospital lines for surgeries because of their skin colour, or the people that let Heather Duplessis-Allen rip into a school kid protesting climate inaction and cause a pile-on against her. Sure, we'll try and do better next time. David Seymour, seen here breaking into song because his punitive criminal measures were clearly inspired by Les Miserables, has had to deal with a blow from his new Ministry of Regulation, which released a report on David Seymour's Treaty Principles Bill this week that stated the work had not gone into its creation to ensure that it would be in the best interest of New Zealanders, which is a really expensive way of telling us something we already knew, but left Seymour with an awkward choice of criticising his own pet ministry like he's done for others, or ignoring it and finding another distraction. Said Seymour, look over there, we're directing ministries to focus on needs, not race. Speaking of the Treaty Principles Bill, the Ministry of Justice is taking extreme measures to protect the bill from leaks after it was presented to caucus last week. These new measures include chucking them in the basement of the government building and ignoring them, and being placed in a suitcase in the Public Trust Office in Palmerston North to sit in a corridor for years. Oh wait, that's actually what happened to the original Te Tiriti documents. This bill is going to require top-level security clearance to access, which includes a mix of physical and digital security measures. In Hamilton, Sovereign Citizen and New Zealand Loyal-linked councillor Andrew Bidder, seen here wondering if he needs to issue more execution writs to his co-workers to get them back in his good books, was found to have breached council code of conduct rules he had agreed to when he submitted feedback to neighbouring Waipa District Council, which included denigrating slurs used against disabled peoples. During his defence presentation at an extraordinary meeting, he claimed he was justified in using bad language because it was all about 20-minute cities, and threatened Deputy Mayor Angela O'Leary with a citizen's arrest. After the process was concluded and Bidder was ordered to apologise, he told media that he would be refusing to do so, saying, "I'm sorry, but I don't apologise." Throughout the process, Bidder is focused on the fact that his language was bad, not on who the language would harm, and refusing to apologise to groups which included IHC. He's showing once again that sovereign citizens are just arseholes who want to use pseudo-law to continue being arseholes. On Wednesday, Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters, seen here holding on to notes to help him with his kōrero, claimed Parliament standards and oratory skills were in a state of decline when Te Pāti Māori MP Te Kuta Ferris used a laptop to inform parts of his kōrero, calling out the coalition for deliberately misleading voters. Ferris was very deliberate to not name names, but Winston still heard that he was being called a liar. Hearing things that aren't there, getting uppity at young people using new technology, and being grumpy when someone uses Te Reo Māori, Winston is one cloud-yelling session away from becoming a walking meme. This week marked the 141st anniversary of the signing of the 1893 Electoral Bill, which granted women full voting rights for the first time. I really should avoid the National Party as a source if I want accurate information, I guess. At one stage in 2001, the top 5 political and legal positions in this country were all held by women. Dame Sylvia Cartwright was Governor-General, Helen Clark was Prime Minister, Jenny Shipley was Leader of the Opposition, Cyan Ellis was Chief Justice, and Margaret Wilson was Attorney-General. Now, though, we have a future Deputy Prime Minister who wants to abolish the Women's Ministry after claiming that suffragette Kate Shepherd would vote for him, and a Prime Minister who didn't know if women really faced vitriolic sexist comments from the public after Christchurch members of his own party led a campaign targeting female politicians, which he called vile and toxic. And finally, the Hawke's Bay Airport has unveiled its name for its new fire truck. The $1.6 million state-of-the-art firefighting appliance can spray 7,400 litres of water up to 90 metres away and has a top speed of 122 kilometres per hour. The winning name? Dame Judy Drench, which I think is brilliant. That is the news. Hey, thanks so much for checking out this week's Omnibus edition. There's so much stuff happening every week that I literally have to cram a whole bunch of it now into those Friday news updates, which I do live with our Behind the Walls stream that we do on Friday night. This week we have Kieran McAnulty coming up, which I'm really looking forward to because I've got so many questions about local government because I'm a big old nerd that way. Hey, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. That way you get updates when they come out. And don't forget, check out the community tab. There's all sorts of things going on over there. You can check out the new exclusive member emojis that have been launched this week. There's 5 new ones and the rest have been given a bit of a glow up. And there's some creepy stuff there, but people requested it. So, hey, enjoy. Until next time, ka kite anō. Have a fantastic week. And I will see you all next time. Here the links to other things that come at the end of YouTube videos.